Sus Majestades, estimables laureados, miembros de la Fundación Princesa de Asturias, señoras y señores, discúlpeme, por favor, porque mi castellano no está perfectamente correcto. ¿Cómo no, sí? Yo soy de Mississippi. No es posible. Así que, con su permiso, continuaré en inglés o en americano, con la esperanza de no hacer más el ridículo. You can imagine the great stir in my and Christina's house when we received an email from His Majesty one morning this summer, an email which revealed that I would unaccountably receive this splendid prize today. Being an American, I have infrequent contact with kings, much less a king and queen as gracious as Your Majesties. I'm sure I could get used to it. I'm a writer, I'm not that busy, I have time for such things. I hope His Majesty and I can keep in contact. I think writing to the king and the king writing to a novelist, even without this prize being in the balance, could possibly bring out a better side of both of us. Not that Your Majesty's best side isn't always forward. I do suppose one might feel great humility standing here today in this grand room beside these remarkable people and being here with you. I have a difficulty, however, feeling humbled standing where Woody Allen has stood. I feel more a kind of joyous hilarity just at the wondrousness of life, at what can happen in life. I'm sure all of us up here feel that way today. Though we who are writers, we always experience the extraordinariness of what can happen. We know it because we face it on the page every day. Ortega y Gasset wrote, and it's an iconic observation of Ortega's for many here. He wrote, and I quote him, "Life is given to us empty. Simply existing becomes a poetical task." I'll say it again because it's a wonderful line. Life is given to us empty. Simply existing becomes a poetical task. Receiving life empty is just another way of saying that anything can happen. And writer's poetical task is, with our imaginations, to make more happen in order to increase the total of what can be thought about, and by doing that, to enhance the richness and density of human possibility. To me, this poetical task makes being a writer a joyous vocation and an optimistic one, which a day such as today, if there could ever be other days such as today, it almost perfectly embodies. Writers are innately optimistic people, if not always innately joyous. After all, we do not compete with each other, or we shouldn't. When good comes to one of us, we all benefit by feeling encouraged that good can happen. A writer's vocation also presumes that there will be a future where there will be readers for whom our books will be useful. It's also the privilege of our vocation to make something be for others, something good where before there was nothing. My own failing as a writer, and it's one that I've struggled with all my life, and maybe you're the same. My failing is that despite being an optimist, I sometimes lose my touch for joy and joyousness. Grave subjects make me very grave. The world we see now when we look around is very grave and doesn't much encourage joy, as we Americans notice when we think that Donald Trump could be our next president. Or Spanish citizens notice when you consider income disparities and economic dismay, as French people notice, as Greek people notice, as Eritreans fleeing Africa notice. Joyousness seems to be fast diminishing in the world. All the more need, I suppose, for acts of imagination to invent it for us anew. The American novelist Henry James wrote once that there are no themes so human as the themes that reflect out of the confusion of life the relation between bliss and bale, the relation between things that help and things that hurt. What James meant was that life is full of woe, as the Bible tells us, but that woe can be joined to the blissful, even to the joyousness, by acts of imagination like the joined faces on the mask of drama. I cannot generalize to you and say that great literature is always one way or always another way, but I can say that I would be a great writer if I could be. And that my strategy for finding greatness is always, if I can, to write stories that connect the woeful with the joyous, and in doing so, to expand our awareness of human possibility, our awareness that anything can happen. This is another way of understanding Ortega and the politics and poetics of existing. I mean, literature is free, right? In a free society such as mine and such as yours, no one tells writers what to do. Nothing even depends on the outcome of what we do unless we write something great. Why would we then not try, as Cervantes tried, to imagine more, even though the reductive forces of convention tell us to imagine less? When I look at television and read newspapers at home in the US, I see all over the world efforts by the intolerant among us to drive human beings violently away from one another. And yet for writers, our first source of consolation and the embodiment of our entire optimism is each other. What gives me hope, and sometimes it's the only thing that gives me hope, are acts that try to expand tolerance and acceptance and empathy for each other beyond the conventional, beyond the merely practical and the mean. Poetical acts, Ortega might say, which are also political acts. I think of myself as a political novelist, not because I write about politicians and elections and affairs of government and their consequences. I do that, but more because everything I've just said is what politics is. Politics determines the fate of humanity by, if it only will, by expanding our ability to accept and find empathy and common cause with one another. If I could, I would rescue what we understand about politics and make the word useful again, make sure it suggests the necessity of imaginative response to making something happen that replenishes our ability to live side by side, just as this can happen in literature and does every day. And have politics not be, as it's become in the United States, a synonym for self-interest and cynicism and deception and absurdity, a synonym for woe. A day such as today is obviously a hopeful one. I know I've received this, or will soon receive this precious prize, so it may seem that I think everything's looking better everywhere and that I have a special gift for the truth. I don't. I'm just lucky today. Another day will come, the pipers will play for somebody else, and another writer will stand where I'm standing. I find that very hopeful. But a truth that we all can see and recognize is that today represents a brief and encouraging, even a joyful coalescence, a small and sweet version of the sort of coalescence the world literally aches and dies for. Something is being made to happen here today. Literature from a foreign language about another culture has been ingeniously translated. A brave and idealistic publisher has risked much to champion this writing and help it find its intended readers. Librarians and booksellers and students have gathered in this wonderful, generous city. TV projects these proceedings all over the globe. Their majesties have given their imprimatur. All of this certifying today not just as a literary event, but undeniably as a political event as well, both in the most basic and democratic sense of politics, where free expression flourishes, and in the most emblematic and historical sense as well. My presence up here is just as a specimen, a surrogate for my colleagues all over the world who are bravely making things happen for the sake of tolerance and empathy and the fate of us all, and often under circumstances so much more difficult than I've ever faced. Tomorrow, I am not going home to Syria. I am not going home to Burma or South Sudan, where literature's task of making something happen, of making an empty life poetical for the good of all, is often virtually impossible, and yet they do it. Possibly one of them will be here next year. My own personal undertaking, immensely inspired by this prize, is completely easy. It is simply to try not to see this wonderful gift as an award signifying that I'm at the end of my work, that I'm too old and over the hill, but to see it instead as a reason for encouragement, a strengthening of my resolve to make something happen that will be of use to the world, possibly bring it joy. Toward that task, I promise you, I will try my best. Estimables colegas, felicitaciones. Muchísimas gracias otra vez a sus majestades. Gracias.